So, continuing a series of teachings that I started a couple months ago on the core teachings of the Buddha, the Four Noble Truths and Eightfold Path. Last time I was here a couple weeks ago, I did the Fourth Noble Truth, which is the Eightfold Path, and I did an overview of the Eightfold Path. And I wanted to begin again at the beginning tonight of the Eightfold Path, and for the next 8, maybe more, times that I teach, talk about the Eightfold Path systematically. And so we're at the first factor of the Eightfold Path tonight, which is traditionally all of the factors of the Eightfold Path are translated as right view or understanding, right intention or thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. Maybe right is the correct translation of the term that the Buddha was using to point out this path, the Eightfold Noble Path. Stephen Batchelor, a teacher that I like, that many people in our community like, has taken to translating it as appropriate rather than right. Appropriate view. Appropriate understanding. Now, right or appropriate is all with the context of if you want to end suffering in your life, if you want to create happiness and well-being and come to liberation, then there is a correct and an incorrect way to look at the world. There is a way that will lead you to happiness, and there is a way that will not lead you to happiness. And so there's the right way, the wrong way. I like appropriate. It's a little bit more gentle. There's the appropriate way to view the world if you wish to end suffering. If you wish to have happiness and liberation, there's an appropriate and an inappropriate way to see what's happening here in this world. The first thing in the first factor that the Buddha points to is he actually revisits. He says, to have the appropriate, the correct view and understanding, you have to understand the first 3 noble truths. The first thing to understand is the truth of dukkha, that there is difficulty, that there is a level of unsatisfactoriness and suffering that all beings have to face. It's an inescapable truth of the difficult nature of existence, that there is pain that is unavoidable, and that all pleasure is impermanent, and there's the grief and loss that goes along with our tendency to cling to pleasure, that we will be separated from everything that we love and everyone that we love, and that this is just the way that it is here. There is dukkha. Not all of life is suffering, but in life, the first thing is understand this as a truth. It's a non-negotiable truth. There's no life for the unenlightened beings, which is us, that doesn't include dukkha. Dukkha is a fact of life. Dukkha is the word that we translate as suffering or dissatisfaction. Sometimes it's translated as even as subtle as stress. There will be stress in your life. It is unavoidable until you're liberated, and then you can end most of the levels of dukkha, but not all of them. Some of the levels of dukkha, like pain. Pain is one of the difficulties, and that even fully enlightened beings have to continue to contend with pain. Enlightenment in this lifetime does not end pain. The bigger picture is that what enlightenment does is that it ends rebirth, so you won't have to be born back into a painful body next time. But as long as you're still alive in this incarnation, there's going to be unpleasant sensations in your mind and body, heart. So understanding dukkha and understanding that there is a cause, that much of it is caused by our attachment, by our craving, by our clinging, by our vain attempts to control this world and our inability to control this world, our fight against permanence, against impermanence, our fight to try to create something permanent. Craving, clinging, and aversion cause the majority of our suffering, the unnecessary levels of suffering. And to understand, it is appropriate to understand that liberation is available to us, that we're not stuck, that philosophies that say, you're born into sin and you're just going to suffer your whole life and you have no choice about it, are incorrect. The appropriate understanding is that you can have happiness, you can have peace, you can have liberation, you can have freedom in this lifetime if you are willing to train your heart and mind, to change your relationship to pleasure and pain, to practice kindness, compassion, and forgiveness. Nirvana, liberation, is possible. So the first three key things to understand, the appropriate things to know about suffering, the cause of suffering, the end of suffering. Dukkha, tanha, nirvana. The next thing that the Buddha, and this teaching is actually quite long, I don't know how far I'll get with it tonight, but the next piece for us to understand if we wish to end suffering, if we wish to come to nirvana, come to liberation, is the truth of the causal relationship of all things. Cause and effect. Simply put, karma. The truth of karma. That karma, from this perspective, is not a philosophy, it's not an idea, it's a law of nature. It's what's happening here. Every action has a reciprocal consequence. Wholesome actions have wholesome outcomes. Unwholesome actions lead to more suffering. Unwholesome lead to unhappiness. The traditional list is thus. Karmically unwholesome. Number one. I feel like the talk show host. Number one. The destruction of living beings is karmically unwholesome. And so this is maybe simple, and you say, okay, killing, yeah, that makes sense. But this is taken towards all living beings. And as humans conditioned with a Judeo-Christian worldview, we all would say, oh yeah, killing humans, right? Killing each other, not so cool. But it's okay to kill insects, right? It's okay to kill animals. It's okay to kill, right? Most of us have a conditioning to say it's okay to kill smaller beings. Humans, not so cool, unless they really deserve it, right? If they have maybe the wrong political views, then you might want to kill them. But the Buddha is saying all living beings, karmically unwholesome, to kill insects, to kill spiders, to kill... Now, this is in the context of understanding that we do live in a realm where it's impossible to survive without killing. And so karma needs to be understood on what is our intention. Are we intentionally killing? And so there's a difference between, slapping the mosquito and murdering the mosquito because it's annoying you, because you're afraid of it, right? That is karmically unwholesome, to kill because you're annoyed. Which is different than harvesting the head of lettuce and killing 100 aphids because you're vegan and you want to eat the lettuce, but you just killed 100 living beings that were living on your piece of lettuce. But you have to eat lettuce. You have to. You're not killing those aphids, those fruit flies, those insects that are on your fruits and vegetables that you survive on, you're not killing those because they're annoying you. You have to eat. And part of eating is knowing that you're part of a food chain, that even in the, most non-violent diet choice, like veganism or something, or freeganism, or I read a great vegetarian book years ago that was talking about the best way is to just wait for the fruit to fall off of the tree. And then that's the least harm, is don't even, because if you even pick it, you're kind of hurting the tree. But if you just wait for it to fall, if it's that ripe, and then, or the stuff that has fallen, then that would be a, almost karma-free diet. So number one, not killing all living beings. Number two, stealing is karmically unwholesome. Karma, negative karma in stealing. And this is obvious on a lot of levels. But there's probably subtleties to it that we're not always paying attention to. I'd imagine that most people in here don't steal, shoplift, robberies, that kind of stuff. But one of the ways that this is translated sometimes is not taking that which is not offered. In the precepts, we commit to not stealing. And what are the subtleties of that is, do you sometimes help yourself to a couple of extra packets of sugar when you're at the coffee shop? You're not actually going to use them now, you're going to take them home for later. And, it's kind of like, well, no big deal. It was out there. It was sugar. But it's actually stealing. It's actually taking something that wasn't offered for you to take home and use later. And to seeing the kind of greed and selfishness, even in those little subtle ways that we help ourselves to extra. Number three, unlawful sexual intercourse is karmically unwholesome. So any kind of sexual misconduct. And Buddhism's pretty liberal. I think actually the Buddha was pretty liberal about sexuality. And he was basically saying consenting adults, consenting single, appropriate sexuality, that there's no judgment, there's no, it's only when it's inappropriate, if there's lies, manipulation, or any kind of violence or coercion, that it's considered unlawful. So he's pretty, I think, liberal around sexuality. But when you're manipulating, when you're lying, when you're cheating, major karma of being involved in that kind of sexuality, negative karma. Lying, tale-bearing, harsh language, frivolous talk. And it's interesting, speech is mentioned so many times in the Eightfold Path. It's mentioned here in the first factor, what creates negative karma. Out of this list of, how many? 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them are about our words. Half of negative karma is about how we communicate. Lying, tale-bearing, harsh language, frivolous talk. It's only 4. All right, 4 out of 10. But it's still the majority. Every other action has 1. And then the Buddha goes on to giving speech, appropriate and right speech, its own factor. Right speech is a factor on the Eightfold Path. And it's mentioned again in action and in the precepts to abstain from lying. So over and over and over, the Buddha is pointing towards, we're going to create most of our karma in the way that we speak. Most of the actions, right? Speaking is an action. You're going to be creating so much karma every day in the way that you communicate. Is it harsh? It's unwholesome to speak in a harsh way. It causes harm. If it's unkind. Tale-bearing. Frivolous. and lying. Tale-bearing is basically, I guess, gossiping. It's a Victorian translation to gossiping. Or maybe exaggerating. Everything that we do intentionally, every word that comes out of our mouth, every action that we take intentionally creates karma for us. And so we're being guided to understand how important it is. The last three on the list are covetousness, ill will, and wrong views. So of course, if you're holding the wrong view, you're going to, like if you're holding the view that it's okay to kill animals, you're going to have the karma of that action, of that what that wrong view leads to. Ill will. Now ill will, it's interesting, right? Because this isn't even the violence. This is just holding resentment. And having a view that it's okay to stay angry, to stay holding ill will, spite, or resentment towards others. Just holding the view that it's okay to do that and holding on to resentment itself is karmically unwholesome. So you get the picture and you know all of this, right? Wholesome karmic actions are to abstain from killing, to abstain from stealing, to abstain from unlawful sexual contact, to abstain from lying, to abstain from tale-bearing, to abstain from harsh language, like shit, from abstain from frivolous talk, to abstain from covetousness, to abstain from ill will, to have right understanding. Now, in this translation, he's just using the opposite, to abstain from. It's also quite useful to translate this and to say, instead of abstain from killing, to have compassion for life, to protect life, is a karmically wholesome action. Instead to say from abstain from stealing, you could actually say to practice generosity, to not only not take, but to give is karmically wholesome. And to protect relationships and to be wise and careful with our sexuality and to practice honesty and to speak and live in a way that has integrity and to use our language in a way that is wise and careful and to practice forgiveness rather than to abstain from ill will, to practice forgiveness, to practice compassion, to make amends and to take full responsibility for our actions. These are karmically wholesome ways of being and will create the factors that will lead to happiness and to non-suffering. May any goodness that comes from our practice, from the teachings of the Buddha, be shared with all beings everywhere. May all of us come to the appropriate, the wise, the correct understanding of ourselves, of each other, of this world that we live in. Together may we create a positive change in this world.